started. As I said, it's a rental module features webinar. We're going to just do a high-level overview. The first thing to touch on is in the main menu of the software, and you look at the modules over here on the left-hand side within the different locations. There is no rental module listed over here in the list on the left. So it's one of those things that, yes, it's in the software, but we made the decision to kind of sell it separately since not a lot of people have not a lot of dealerships have a rental business. It's one of the, it became really popular, I think, maybe a couple years ago. Everyone kind of started blowing up, and now lending is so much easier. You get more people buying than you have renting. So it kind of ebbs and flows like that. But, you know, in order to keep up with industry demand, we do have a rental module. And it does integrate. It benefits from being integrated with the rest of these tools, you know, so it uses the same thing in the CRM that you would be using in the parts and service module, you know, the same customer list. It uses units from unit inventory. So there's a lot of tight integration with the rest of your system for you to manage your rentals and have that post to accounting afterwards. As well as have a lot of other integration. So, however, it's not in the main menu. So if you need to use rental, there will always be a separate icon on your desktop. And the other thing, just as kind of, you know, it doesn't come set up out of the box. So the reason for this is because I've seen a lot of variance in contract language from dealership to dealership. There's also a lot of specific laws within each state which dictate how rentals need to be billed and the kind of verbiage you put in your contract based on the state requirements, as well as the way the taxes are going to be collected. There's a lot of variance. I've never really seen a totally standard setup for rentals. There's just a lot of variance in the industry. So for that reason, it comes in a non-configured state. And the very first step with configuring your rental module is to call in, you know, request it, and then we have a conversation for how you need to have the rental module configured. And then we'll go in and configure it, make sure that it's working for you. And then we can do some training on it as well, some in-depth training for your employees on how to use rental for your particular business. So that's just how it works. And honestly, it's because the industry isn't very boilerplate when it comes to rentals. Now, some of it is, and I'm going to walk through just the basic process of how to get started in the system, starting a quote. But I will occasionally touch on the fact that what you're seeing in my demo system may not be exactly what you see after we've set up the rental module for you and your business. All right, so over here on the left, we have rental invoices where you have 100 invoicing, new quote, new agreement, and then rental calendar. So I'm going to be running down through these. I'm really not going to talk too much about the storage invoices. Storage invoices is for generally for marinas, but for this webinar, we're going to be focusing mostly on rental invoices, which would be actual units rolling off the lot and going with customers to be rented, and then bringing them back in later on. So you have a pickup date, a return date, which is a little different than storage. With storage, customers are bringing units into the dealership and dropping them off. So we're not going to talk too much about storage. We're just going to talk about how to rent units. All right, so we use a lot of the same design language that you'll be familiar with if you've used our parts and service module. Which means that there is 100 invoicing, which is a folder here. If you click 100 invoicing, you're going to see rental invoices in a reserved status. What that means is we're still waiting for the customer to come in and pick up the unit. But it's a reservation, meaning they've actually put a deposit down on that unit. All right, so there are buttons along the bottom here which are going to change the list that you see at the top. So if I click the quote button, now I'm seeing rental invoices, quotes. Reserved button is going to be the default that it goes to, which is your reservations. Then we have a contract start list, contract end list, and then finally contract complete. And what these actually mean is if it's in contract start, that means that this is a list of all your customers who currently have a rental unit in their possession. It is out right now. These are off the lot. Customer has them. They're in the middle of their contract. Those are contract start. Then we have contract end, which means that unit has been brought back in, and you may have done final billing for the customer, and you're basically just getting, when it's in contract end, you're getting all those final charges added. Like, for example, you may have return charges for things like pet deposits that need to be reduced, or maybe a refueling fee. If it's a motorized unit and they brought it back empty, you might charge them for that, or a cleaning fee. If there's some kind of damage, you might bill them for damage. So that's contract end. You're getting the contract into a state where it's finalized. Then we have contract complete. It's contract complete once the customer has made their final payment at the end. Maybe they've gotten their deposit refunded, depending on if you charge a deposit and then refund it after the fact. Contract complete is going to be a list of invoices that their customer is totally paid up, and unit is all checked in. And of course, the final step is to send that agreement to accounting. So sent to accounting would be the last list, and this is an archival list of all past agreements. Another really familiar piece of design language will be this yellow filter bar at the top of the list. So again, if I'm looking at contract start and I have a lot of units out right now, I can click under the customer on the yellow filter bar and just start typing, and it will filter that list out and allow me to find what I'm looking for quickly. So that's going to work whether you're in the reserved, quote, contract start. You can see as I click these, it's going to change my list, but my filter stays the same. So if you're looking for a customer and you can't find them under contract start, you can click reserved, quote, whatever, and you should be able to see your agreement pop up. All right, so that's how that works. As far as the layout that goes and navigating through, it should be pretty familiar, especially if you've got people who are already trained in the rental module or trained in parts and service, I should say. They'll pretty much pick up the rental module pretty quickly. So the process, getting started, we'll hit new quote, 101 new quote, single click. All right, so what's going to happen is we're brought to a rental calendar, right? So the rental calendar has a listing of all invoices that are currently out, and they'll show up in bold on the calendar over here. So what I can do is on the calendar, I can actually click and drag from the pickup date over to the return date. And when I click and drag over here, let's say units can be picked up June 10th and returned June 14th. As I drag those dates across, it's going to set my pickup and return dates down here at the bottom. So we have 6/10/2019, 6/14/2019. I can click the refresh button. And what's going to happen is when I refresh, my list of units over here will update. And as you can see, there's a rental estimate which appeared next to each one of these units. So that estimate of dollars is going to be based on my pickup and return date. The system can estimate how much it costs for that customer to rent this unit, but it won't include any kind of extra fees or charges. This is just kind of the base rate for these units as to how much it would cost. The other thing that happens when I click refresh is that it's going to take off units from this list that are currently out during those days. So if I had any active agreements on a unit, then they just won't show up as available. So when I'm putting in this filter here, I'm only seeing a list of units that are currently available within the dates I've selected on the left. So it's kind of convenient. What you do is you pick up your dates, you just select what unit is available, and then kind of go from there. The other thing I can do is go ahead and load my customer. If the customer already exists in the database, you can do a search for them. So we can go to last name and type Anderson, for example, and hit enter. And it'll do a quick search for customers with that last name. The other thing I can do is do an advanced search from here to find my existing customers. But that's a standard interface. When I pick my customer over here on the left, their name is going to appear in this little text window. And that's about all that happens at this point. I'm just basically loading my customer up on this screen and clicking refresh, getting the dates worked out. To actually start an agreement, I want to click that select button next to the unit that's going to be going out on the agreement. So I'm just going to select one of these. And now we get to our actual rental agreement. So this window is going to show me my customer information at the top, and it's also going to show me my pickup date and my return date. And then it gives me the status, which right now the status is quote. I can change the status on this agreement over to my reserved, checked out, checked in, completed, and finally sent to accounting. And this status controls which list it shows up in back on the rental module window. All right, but right now it's in a quote. So generally the process is going to look like this. When I load the unit, which is this section here, it's going to automatically fill out the variable rate, which as you can see, there's a days 1, days 2, days 3, days 4, and the numbers are incrementing. So, you know, if I had a 5-day rental, for example, the system would automatically calculate $275. What this allows you to do is get yourself what we would call a variable rate, where you can charge more for 1 day than you would for 2 days. You know, in other words, if your daily rate goes down, the more days that you are renting, you can get that variation within the first week. So the first 7 days allow you to have a variable rate. Then our system automatically switches to a weekly rate that you see over here on the right. And then it transitions to a monthly rate after 30 days. So, and this is all based on the pickup and return dates. So this is all something we get figured out ahead of time. During that meeting, we'll discuss how you do bill for your rentals, and then we'll make sure that your units are in those categories for billing, that they have the right rates on the units. But that's how it works. Now, at some dealerships, you don't need a variable rate, so we may use the daily flat rate. So there are other options. You can also do hourly as well. There is also a way to apply a seasonal rate. So what a seasonal rate would be is if you do have a high volume season where you're going to increase the amount of the rentals within that date range, we can hit that, we can search for it, and basically you can pick a seasonal rate, which is going to give you a different days 1, days 2, days 3, days 4 for the season. And this will allow you to do your surge pricing. Alternatively, there's a VIP rate. What a VIP rate is, anytime you have a customer who is in a particular category where they're going to pay a different rate than other customers. So this can include corporate accounts, or if customers, you know, are in a particular VIP group of frequent renters or something like that, we can create VIP rates, which again, based on the VIP rate that you create, you're just going to say it's a different days 1, days 2, days 3 for that particular class. So those are options. That brings us down to the right-hand side, which has fees/charges. And there are some tabs here. We're going to talk about those tabs in a little bit here, but the fees, charges is, you know, if you just opened the rental module and it wasn't configured, you wouldn't see anything in fees and charges. We actually have to add those for you when we set up the module. So that's a part of that initial discussion. We'll figure out what fees you need. It is possible that a fee can be anything. It can actually be a fee or a charge or an insurance, a return charge, which would be a fee that you charge or a charge that you're going to charge on the return of the rental. Something like a cleaning fee or you know, some kind of a damage fee would be a return charge, or a miscellaneous tax, or actually a discount. So if you can give customers, for example, like a 10% discount, we may end up making that a fee that you can just say, okay, I'm going to go in here to my discount fee and apply it. And that's going to reduce the amount of this rental for this customer. You know, rather than trying to have a VIP rate for that discount, we can just make it a percentage. You can mark it as sold by just checking it off. And when you uncheck or check things as sold on this screen, it's going to automatically update down here at the bottom. And another question I get a lot about the fees is, can I change the amount of the fee that's calculated here? Yes, you can. It's totally flexible. You can basically go per agreement and you can change the default amount. For example, that Florida surcharge is $2 with a quantity of 5. It's a miscellaneous tax. So if I can change this to $3, it'll automatically update on the invoice, and I can mark it as sold. And when I market is sold, it automatically comes down to our breakdown, which is down here at the bottom. All right, so now take a look at the breakdown. You're going to see, okay, you get to see your variable rate. So you're going to see if we're transitioning to monthly, weekly, or daily. In this case, we haven't reached 7 days yet. We're still at a 5-day rental, which is why we're getting the 5-day rate over here. $275 is what is calculated. So that's going to change. If I come up here to my return date and I move it out by a week, so now we're picking up on the 10th, returning on the 21st, you can see that it's transitioned. Now we have 1 week at $380, which is your weekly rate up here, and then 5 days at the what we call a weekly extra rate. So that weekly extra becomes what your daily rate is for every day greater than 7 days, but less than 30 days. If we change our return date out past 30 days and say this is like a long-term rental, well, then it recalculates again to now we have 2 months, right? 2 months at the monthly rate up here, which is $1,650, plus a daily rate, which is being pulled from the monthly extra field. So monthly extra becomes every day less than 30 days, but over a month. So there are 7 of those here to calculate it out. So that might be a lot to wrap your head around. I mean, that's just how it works internally. So we would get this figured out ahead of time. Your user pretty much using the software is going to come in here, load the unit, and it automatically calculates based on the pickup and return dates. So that works out pretty well. If I change this to daily flat rate, what that does is simplifies it even further. If you don't need the variable rate, like I described it, you can just say, okay, days 1 up here, $55. That's my daily rate. We're going to calculate based on a daily flat rate. And now we have 67 days at the daily flat rate. So, you know, depending on how you bill your rentals, this is how it will automatically calculate it for you. Okay, so that takes care of billing on here. The process basically goes where you're going to load up the fees and charges, make sure that everything is accurate, and then move on to the drivers. We can add additional drivers to this agreement. The reason why you might want to add additional drivers in the software is to be able to track who's actually driving the unit. And the other reason is because if there's any government forms you have to print out where multiple drivers' information needs to be printed on that form, this is where you would go to add that information. All right, so then we move on to the deposits tab, and this is a tab where you would go to put in your deposits. So if you have a quote and you require the customer give you $200 as a deposit, I would come in here, hit add new deposit, type in the $200, and cash it out. So cashing out a deposit is going to bring out the same cash out screen that you would recognize from our parts and service and finance modules, as well as accounting. Anytime you take cash from a customer, it uses the same interface, and it'll create an accounting transaction the same way as well for daily deposits. All I do here is I click the type of payment that's being made. If it's Visa, MasterCard, or check, or cash, click the button, hit enter, and then print the receipt for the customer. All right, so now we have a cashed out deposit, and it'll be reflected in the breakdown. You can see our total charges that we have, less our deposits, are going to give you the total current amount due. And it's trying to save my printout there, so I'm going to close out of that. So there's our deposits. We have a deposit on this agreement. If we move on to tax information, this is where the rental tax is itemized. So depending on your state, there may be different taxes charged. And in the setup, we may end up making like a special state code for, like, say, Florida rentals. If it's a different tax on your rentals, we can always put in custom state codes for that and make sure that we're charging the right kind of rent on these agreements. And this also goes back to accounting. It'll be posted to accounting correctly as well when you get rental tax. Sets tax information. Fuel mileage is a tab that's going to be used for estimating mileage. If you're going to charge an estimate for mileage and say they're going to be charged, 500 miles here, that's going to calculate to how we bill for mileage, which can be per 5 miles we charge 10 cents, and this will automatically calculate back in the fees charges tab. The same thing is used for the generator. If you're going to charge for a generator, we can put in the number of hours on leave, the number of hours on return, and the difference will calculate as a generator charge, like a return charge on the generator hours. All right, so that's how this tab works. And then, of course, the pictures at the top are for the fuel. So if you do have a motorized unit, I could say that the gallon capacity of the unit was 30 gallons. Let's say it left on leave, it was 30 gallons. That means the tank was full, and the little dial moves over to show that. But let's say it only came back, with 10 gallons in it, right? So this is just going to move the dial to show you how much fuel's remaining in the unit. And then the difference between these is going to be calculated as a fuel charge automatically back here on the fees charges. So it all works pretty well. Moving on, we've got an insurance tab. Insurance is going to be where you document the customer's insurance information. And again, the reason why you might want to document it is because you might want a record in the software of their insurance provider, their policy, their term, deductibles, comprehensive, collision. And then the other reason is because if you have a government form that you have to print out for your rentals and it includes the customer's insurance information, those forms can pull from this information. You can get a printout in the form system. All right, images, special tab where you can document images on a rental. So you can take pictures of damage, for example. When I click view images, it brings me to a folder on the database for the software. So you can see it goes into the file share, a shared directory, rental pics, followed by this rental agreement number. And I can actually copy and paste pictures into this folder, and they will then be attached to this agreement, so I can always reference my pictures whenever I search for the agreement in the software. Pretty cool. Then we have internal notes, notes/memo. These are notes that won't print out for a customer, but you will be able to view them on the rental agreement. And there's finally a tab called rental units, which will show you all the units that are currently available between the pickup and return dates. If I click select on one of these, it will actually change the unit on the agreement, which will change the pricing for that unit as well. So this unit, for example, is $200 a day. So it's calculating a much higher rental rate on that unit. And we can switch back and forth on this units tab. All right, so that takes care of the whole interface on here. It should be pretty clear how it all works. The process, once you've taken a deposit, is going to be to change the status from quote to a reservation. And we can call it reserved, hit save, we can hit exit, and now that's a reservation on my calendar. So if we look back at our list of invoices and we click reserved, we've got my customer listed right here as a reservation. So moving forward, when the actual start date gets closer and the customer comes in to pick up their unit, I would enter the agreement again and change the status from reserved to checked out to indicate that the unit has left. The other thing I might want to do at this stage is go ahead and take the full payment for the agreement. So once again, it depends on your business process. I know some dealerships, they don't take the full payment for the rental upfront. They just do like a little bit of money down and then the customer pays and they bring the unit back. But it seems it's probably more common that you would prepay and they basically pay for the entire agreement before they can get the unit and take it out. So to do that, I would look at my fees and make sure that I am charging, let's say we have a security deposit of $500 here. That security deposit can be refunded later on. And so I do want to sell it to the customer and charge them that $500 as their security deposit. And that's going to be included down here. You can see it's itemized in the breakdown, and that's a part of the total amount due. So once we've checked out the unit, I want to click the collect payment button at the bottom. So there's a difference between a deposit, which was $200, as you can see. There's a difference between a deposit and a collect payment. When I collect payment, it's going to take this number in red, the total amount due, and just charge it to the customer, which is what we want to do on checkout. So I'm going to click collect payment. It'll put the number up at the top. I can say how they're paying. Let's say they gave me Discover card for this, hit enter, hit print receipt. So now you can see in the breakdown, we have an itemization, we have a $200 deposit, which did reduce the amount of the total of agreement. And then we have our payment, which is the total amount due is 0 now. So it is now checked out. I can exit this agreement. And if I click my reserved, you see it disappears. And if I click contract start, that's where it is. It moves along the process by changing the status. So that brings us to when the unit gets checked in. I would open the agreement again. Now we're ready to check in the unit. Let's say it's now the return date, and I'm ready to check it back in. Well, I need to come into this screen and uncheck the security deposit as sold. I can just uncheck that box. And as you can see, it's reduced the amount of the invoice, and now we have a negative amount due. And I believe we have some percentages that calculated differently because I unchecked that. So yeah, probably that wouldn't happen. Usually you just have a flat $500 here. I bet you it's marked as taxable, and that's why it's doing that. But the point is, this is what you're going to refund the customer. So you may actually want to put the return charges on at this point. So let's say there's an over mileage fee. We want to mark that as sold. And what that does is now it charges their over mileage, and it's reduced the amount of the return. Now it's only $488 they're being returned instead of the $505. And we're going to continue to do that based on the verbiage in your rental contract. There could be some return charges. Let's say there's a tire battery fee. We can mark that as sold. Vehicle license fee, we can go ahead and sell that too. And as I sell these, I'm just reducing the amount of their return. That's their security deposit being kind of chiseled away by the return charges. So you may already have figured this one out, but once I get this agreement into a final state, I'm going to move it from checked out to checked in. I've got the charges on here. So what I'm also going to do at the checked in stage is check in the unit, which means looking at the fuel mileage, putting in a final number for the odometer. Let's say that the final reading on the odometer was 5500. Let's say we put a couple thousand miles on there. It will then go in, and based on this criteria, I've included miles per day, the per mile extra charge, and then the charge. All this is going to flow down here onto your mileage on the fees, which will further reduce your amount due. Same thing on fuel and mileage. If we put in generator hours, it can flow onto a generator charge as well. And that's what you do at the check-in phase. Once that's all done, we can move it to the completed phase, which, depending on the size of your business, you may not even need all these steps. If you just have one person who's responsible for checking in the unit and getting the agreement finalized and posting it to accounting, you may just change it on to completed with skipping over the check-in step. But again, it's based on the size of your dealership. There may actually be a separate person who's checking in the unit versus who's working up the contract. So that's what these statuses are going to do for you. But anyway, so what we have now is a reduced deposit refund. So what I'm going to do at this point is click the collect payments button again. And it's going to take that negative amount, tells me it's less than 0. So I'm looking to do a refund right now. I hit OK. And then we're going to be putting this refund back onto the customer's card, or however else you want to do the deposit refund. Click the appropriate pay button and hit enter. And it will then refund that pay type and zero out the agreement. So that's that. Then, of course, the last step would be to post it to accounting, which it's probably your accounting department that would do this. They would look at the agreement, make sure that everything balances to 0, make sure everything looks good, and then finally click that send to accounting button at the bottom. And this is a step that you don't get in parts and service, but this is a step in the finance part of our software. So we're pulling, again, more design language from that finance module, and we're putting in an accounting template where we can say, okay, rental preset, and then it creates the accounting transaction. And pretty much all a rental invoice does is give you revenue in, revenue for the rental, and then you're offsetting those deposits. So here's my $200 deposit plus the final payment for this. And we may have separate liability accounts for taxes, separate revenue accounts for things like fuel charges, or different accounts for different things can all be itemized out. So a lot of customizability here. And again, it doesn't really come set up by default. So we have to kind of talk to you about how to set it up when you first purchase the rental module. All right, taking a break to take a look at the Q&A section. I don't see any questions. So yeah, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A of the meeting. And now what I'd like to do is just walk through a couple of setup screens and discuss where some of this information is keyed in and where you can then change it. What happens a lot of times is your rates will change. Well, it's all very flexible in the system. You can go up here to edit fees. We can go to the rental fee setup, and this is the list of all those fees that you can mark as sold. This is where you go to change the default amount. Like if your deposit changed from $500 to $600, I could change it, and new agreements would have the correct amount. So that's how that works. Pretty much with the setup. There's also a place for the regular rental. So if we go to our classes, go to rental classes, we can establish a class of unit, like for example, 16 foot, 20 foot, 25 foot, motorized versus towable. And those classes will have your days 1, days 2, days 3, your variable rates programmed in. So that when you go to set up the unit, you just put the unit into the class, and it'll automatically have the right charges for the rates. And of course, that flows into the estimate on the calendar as well. If you look at your customer estimate, it's using the class of the unit to determine what the customer would have to pay, not including all the extra fees that you're going to be adding later on. All right. So that takes care of those setups. This is also where you go to put your seasonal rates and your VIP rates. So one thing about seasonal rates is they do have a start date and an end date with their list of variable rates. So you may want to come in here from time to time and update those dates, or you can add a new seasonal rate with new start and end dates. Whereas VIP rates don't have a start and end date. It's just something that you can add to an individual customer, like a club member, executive club, Good Sam, elite club member. When looking at an agreement, there are some printouts that you're going to need to do from point to point when printing out the agreement for the customer. Generally, you're going to come down to the print button for an agreement, or you could come to print docs. Print docs is where your forms are going to be entered. So if you have some kind of customization being made by our forms department, they're going to go under print docs, and that is going to bring you to this kind of 4-square window, which you might recognize from our finance module. This is where your forms can be printed out for rentals. It does include customized agreements or anything that we don't consider to be boilerplate. This thing in our software that we think is boilerplate is the print menu. So if I come in here to preview that, this is going to show you what we've put in the software as kind of the standard agreement. And as I kind of said earlier, there really isn't a standard rental agreement, but what we've done is we've used the standardized agreement. I think we got this from a 20 group, maybe the Spader group or RVDA, but this was their standard RV rental form. So if you want something different than this, it would be something that our forms department would customize for you. But this is going to work for most RV rentals. It's going to show you all the fees, only the ones that you marked as sold will print out here. We see our date time in, date time out. It's going to put the right information in the right place. So things like charges, fees, insurance, miscellaneous taxes. Of course, we have sales tax, discounts, any kind of deposits are going to show up here, as well as any payments. So your deposits show up here, payments show up over here, and it's just a standard kind of boilerplate thing that we found. So that's built in. You don't need any custom programming for this to work, whereas any forms that you have go through our forms department. All right, so in looking over at Q&A, I don't see any questions being asked, so we're going to go ahead and draw the webinar to a close. Appreciate your patience, everybody, and do hope you have a great rest of the day.